On today's episode of Locked On Pistons podcast, we are joined by Vincent Goodwill to talk about the Detroit Pistons' recent 8-game winning streak. How high can Cade get on the All-NBA teams? And do the Pistons have the executive and coach of the year on this team? We'll talk about that in today's episode of Locked On Pistons podcast. Let's go.
You are Locked On Pistons, your daily Detroit Pistons podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
What's the deal? Welcome back to another episode of the Locked On Pistons podcast. Per usual, I'm your host, Ku Khahil. You can find me over on Twitter at Ku Khahil. I want to thank you guys for making Locked On Pistons your first listen of every single day. We're free and available on all your podcast platforms. If you haven't already, head to the YouTube channel at Locked On Pistons. Hit that subscribe button or leave us a 5-star review or whatever podcast platform you're listening to us on. That's another great way to support the podcast. And today's episode is brought to you by FanDuel. Right now, new FanDuel customers get $150 in bonus bets if your first $5 bet wins. Like I've been letting you guys know, make sure you guys head over to the playback link down below in the description. Watch Pistons games with myself and the rest of the Pistons fan base. This last game against the Celtics was super dope and a lot of fun talking and hanging out with you guys while we watch the game. But let's go ahead and get into today's episode. We are joined by Vincent Goodwill, host of the Good Word podcast and also NBA writer at Yahoo Sports. You guys all know who Vinny is. Also has hosted a lot of podcasts with our guy James, who sadly left us for New York. But, you know, James is with us in spirit. Vinny, how are you doing, man?
Hey, man, James left for who I got fun, right?
Hey, he's having fun in New York, man. He's having fun.
That man is in jail in New York covering that team.
I wasn't going to say it, but you can say it. You're close to it.
If there's one man that does and doesn't want a Knicks Pistons playoff series in the first round, it is him, James Edwards.
Yeah, that would be a lot of fun. I'd have to get him back in the podcast then, but you said it. I'll just leave it at that. You said it. I didn't. So we're good. So we're recording this the day after the Pistons beat the Boston Celtics to extend their winning streak to 8. I want to talk with Vinny about that. We'll talk about Cade a little bit later and also JB Bickerstaff and Trajan Langdon. But Vinny, look, you are aware of what's going on in the Detroit Pistons community and in this franchise the last 15 or so years since they traded Chauncey away for Allen Iverson. They've had 2 peak seasons where they've made the playoffs, I guess you want to call it that, but it's been largely a struggle since then. I think this year is the most hopefulness and most joyful the Pistons fan base has been. They're riding 8-game win streak. What have you seen from this team that's made everyone so, made the fan base and everyone buy into them?
Well, I think the thing that's been different about this year compared to even some of the more positive years that I've seen in the course of my life is you're doing it with homegrown players. You're doing it with players that you've drafted. Like usually it's been, the going to work guys. Those were trades you made and you were still growing with them, but it was a little bit different. This has been guys you've seen walk up on the stage. And to make matters even more sweet, I guess, if you're a Pistons fan, watching what you went through last year with largely the same group of players, which you were thinking, okay, wait, did we get the wrong guy in Cade? Did we get the wrong guy in Ausar? Did we get the wrong guy in Jaden Ivey? Jaden Ivey was going through it last year. Like, it was a lot going on there. And to see the resurgence happen with all of these same guys doing it, like you struggled with them, and now you're coming on the other side with it. Enjoy this year while you can, because this is the fun year. Next year is the year where, regardless of whatever the personnel changes are, regardless of what happens in the playoffs, there's going to be expectations. And it's a lot more difficult to play with expectations than it is to play loose and free. Like, this is like the first time. This is going to feel fresh, and it's going to feel like with a certain level of like excitement and youth. And I think that's what you're starting to feel with not just the 8-game winning streak, but basically since the first full month of the season, where they started off slow and you were like, okay, at least we're not just a regular bad, at least we're a regular bad team. That's what it felt like. It felt like this team was a regular bad team, not a historical bad team. And then the last 2.5 months, it's like, wait a minute, this isn't a bad team. This is a good team. And this is a really good team that has an identity, and they're playing really hard and they're playing better than everybody. So I think it's going through, sort of waves. And I think you're riding like the highest wave that you've had, honestly, no joke, 17 years.
I mean, look, I talked about it on the podcast the other day. It's crazy to actually say that out loud because it makes, first of all, it makes me feel incredibly old. But secondly,
How you think it make me feel?
but it really is. It's been that long since the Pistons have had like a legit level of success, and I think the expectation for a lot of fans at this point is just break the playoff drought, break the playoff win drought. Don't even have to. Everyone would love the playoff series win, but just break that drought and just get rid of all the curses. It feels like that are around this team right now. They're breaking losing streaks to the Clippers, to the Celtics. I think they had an in-arena one to the Spurs that went back 10 years. Like, they're breaking all these things. Just go ahead and break that drought and just start all anew. But you mentioned they're representing their culture. Can you speak to, or not culture, their identity? What do you think that their identity is for this team right now?
Well, I think the thing that's really hard to explain, to be perfectly honest, is a young team that actually plays defense and commits to defense. Because when you got young players on a young team, we've defined, especially in today's NBA, is you score a lot of points, you're going to get your contract, you're going to get your money, and then maybe you'll figure it out 3 or 4 years later what's it mean to be a real winning player. Now you've got a guy like Isaiah Stewart, who a couple of years ago, everybody was trying to make him to a 40% three-point shooter. You know what I mean? They were like, hey, you've got to become a stretch five. You've got to figure out how to shoot from 23 feet with 40%, with 40% regularity so that you can create some space for the other guys. Now he's off the bench. He's playing 25 minutes a night. He is literally one of the best rim protectors in the league. Like, we could talk a lot about a lot of the individual awards. He should get some real consideration for all defense because of how he's defending at all 3 levels. Like, I think that's the identity where you go from being, okay, this is what the NBA is, so we have to be what the NBA is, or we have to be who we are, what Detroit basketball traditionally and historically stands for. We're going to play defense. We're going to have some strong guard play, and we're going to have some dudes with some personality that colors around the edges, like Ausar Thompson and Malik Beasley, who is in line for a big payday this summer. Like,
He
it's
is.
a lot of things going on here that you could not have predicted if you were looking at this team this time last year.
And you mentioned Ausar Thompson. Like I mentioned, we're going to talk about Cade later, obviously. But you bring up the Detroit identity. Isaiah Stewart very clearly represents that. Stu, I think, has been fantastic this year. His box score numbers haven't been eye-popping, but I think he's clearly having the best year of his career and the most impactful year of his career. He's been fantastic off the bench. He obviously represents what a lot of Pistons fans try to identify Ben Wallace with. He's representing that kind of stuff. Ausar Thompson is another dude who is really pushing what you're talking about. Like, a lot of talk around the NBA nowadays, not just the Pistons, but the NBA has been about the three-point shooting. You got to be able to score. You got to be all offense. And you do have to be able to score the basketball, obviously. The Pistons haven't been awful offensively. But this whole streak, this whole turnaround has been spearheaded by their defense. And it really turned around when Ausar Thompson took over as a starter in January 1st. In the month of December, they had the 3rd worst defense in the entire NBA. As soon as Ausar Thompson came into the starting lineup, since then they have a top 5 defense. Can you speak to what you feel like you've seen from Ausar Thompson, how impactful he's been for him?
Cool. It's like night and day. And I think people, like you said, you made a great point. People get so infatuated with the 3-point shot. And the first thing they look at when you come in the game is, can you shoot? They don't care if you're 7'5" or 5'5". It is, can you shoot? Right? Not, are you a good basketball player? Not, what things do you do that helps contribute to winning, that helps drive winning, that helps influence winning. I think Asar's defense has been a driver of winning, and that's really difficult to do. Like, when I was watching him guard Jason Tatum last night, I felt like that was the perfect encapsulation of everything that he stands for. When Tatum was on the bench, he was on the bench. When Tatum got his ass up, you know who got up? Ausar Thompson got up and walked to that scores table. And that's like, damn. Remember that scene? Remember that in the NBA Finals maybe 10 years ago when LeBron was at the foul line and Kawhi Leonard was coming back in the game, and LeBron looked over and Kawhi was coming back. He was like, damn. And then he tried to tighten up. It's too late. We already saw you say damn. That's what it's like when Ausar Thompson is guarding you, because he doesn't give you space. He's got some of the quickest hands and quickest feet I've seen in quite some time. Like, his body is going to fill out. Like, he's long and rangy right now. He's going to fill out. The shot will come along to be something that's like respected. I'm not worried about him becoming a 3-point shooter. I want the handle to come along, and I'm glad that he's able to contribute without needing the basketball, with being able to find open spaces on the floor so that Duran can pass it to him or Cade can give it to him. He's making himself alive. He's not just standing in the corner like he did last year, where it's like, hey, he's standing in the corner, he's open, shoot the three. No, go to open spaces and make plays. And he's not afraid. Like, it's one thing as a young player in this league, you don't want to get in anybody's chest because you're going to wind up on Instagram. You're going to wind up on Twitter. Everybody's going to say, oh my God, Jason Tatum made you fall. Yep. He doesn't care. And you need a guy who cares less about that stuff and is only committed to like the process of winning. I think that's going to be, out of all the draft picks that they've made, he is the one with the highest upside. He's the one, next to Cade, of course. He's the one that if he pans out, this whole thing has a completely different ceiling than it did before.
And it's crazy to like think, because I agree with you. I've been super high on Ausar since pre-draft, but it's crazy to say it because you can clearly see he has so much room to grow already. Like it's not like he's close to that ceiling. He has a lot of stuff he has to work on, and he's already been their second most impactful player. Like as soon as he came to the starting line, everything changed. And he's second year, has a lot of stuff to work on, coming off an offseason where he didn't have any offseason because of the blood clot stuff. So this is what he's doing like this, and he's not even able to play 30-plus minutes yet. Like he's playing 29, 28, 27 minutes. And despite that, like you said, he's going to the bench, matching Jason Tatum's minutes. Anytime he comes in, I'm coming in, I'm checking him. He had Tatum in torture yesterday.
He's in jail. It
was
in jail yesterday.
It was Guantanamo Bay kind of stuff, bro.
That man was in 36th district court yesterday, like legit. And the thing that gets me is he's one of the most impressive athletes that I've seen that can actually play basketball. Like there's a lot of great athletes, but they cannot like translate their athleticism to playing winning basketball. They're just run and jump dudes. Like, no, he's a run and jump dude that actually has figured it out. You can tell that he's been taught basketball the right way. He's like he can listen, he can be coached, all that type of stuff, man. I am really intrigued by what he can do down the line.
Yeah, and that was something going back to pre-draft you saw with both him and his brother. They just they both are very high IQ, understand the game, process the game very quickly. And I mean, JB spoke about this the other night in I think it was the Clippers game. After the Clippers game, he said, I've never coached a player that has the combination of IQ, feel, instincts, and that crazy type of athleticism all into one player like I have with Ausar. So Ausar's special, and he's been crazy impactful for the Pistons. Like you've mentioned, Stu is really embodying the Detroit basketball culture, and this team behind their defense is riding an 8-game win streak. And we're not just talking about playoffs anymore. We're talking about, will they get home court advantage in the playoffs? Are they going to get to that 4th seed? It's crazy stuff. I don't think anyone could have seen this coming. But coming up, I want to talk with Vinny about Cade Cunningham, the Pistons franchise player, obviously, their superstar, who, by the way, today the Ringer redid their top 100. He came at 17, which is much more respectful than what was being said before the year. How good has Cade been this year? And can you expect Cade to make an All-NBA team? And could he even be the All-NBA second team? We'll talk about that coming up. You guys know who we're going to be talking about right now. That's with FanDuel. I told you guys I've used FanDuel for years now. Every single day, maybe a little too much I've been using it. But it's super fun to use, super self-explanatory, but obviously, most importantly, it's super fun to use. When the games tip off, the NBA action's just getting started, and there's no better place to get in on it than with FanDuel, the America's #1 sportsbook. With a FanDuel, you can place live bets throughout the game, so even if you miss the opening tip-off and want to bet on a fourth quarter comeback, you can stay in on the action. And if you're looking for a bigger payout, you can even combine your live bets into a same-game parlay. Right now, new FanDuel customers can get $150 in bonus bets if your first $5 bet wins. Just visit FanDuel.com to join today. That's FanDuel.com for your shot at $150 in bonus bets. Make every moment more with FanDuel, the official sports betting partner of the NBA. So I want to thank you guys again for making Locked On Pistons your first listen of every single day. We're free and available on all your podcast platforms. If you haven't already, head to the YouTube channel at Locked On Pistons. Hit that subscribe button or leave us a 5-star review on whatever podcast platform you're listening to this on. That's another great way to support the podcast. And like I've mentioned, you guys, I'll put the link down below to the playback room. You can watch the game with me and the rest of the Pistons fan base. We had like 115, 120 people in this last game. It was super fun, super lit, obviously, because of this Boston game. It was crazy. So it's a lot of fun. If you want to be part of it, I'll link it down below. You can join the room and be with us for this Denver game coming up Friday night. But Vinny, obviously the Pistons' success, while it has been, it's turned around because of their defense, because Ausar is really how much he's impacted the team, and Jalen Duren getting better on that end, being more focused, and all this other stuff. It obviously starts at the very top with their best player, their franchise player, Cade Cunningham. I want to ask you about his All-NBA status later on, but first I just want to get your thoughts on how good you think he's been this year and what has impressed you the most about his season.
I think the thing that's impressed me the most, I'm going to start there, is the responsibility that he's carried, that he has not run from, hey, this thing, if it's going to turn around, it's going to turn around because I'm the guy doing it. And young players, no matter how, seasoned you are, no matter what type of pedigree you have, that's a lot of responsibility to put on a guy for a franchise like this, for a franchise that A, has won a lot, and B, has had a long time since there's been winning, which means there's a higher level of expectation and accountability because you are the number one pick. And some guys don't always want to embrace that. And Cade, from day one, he has never run from that responsibility. He's wanted to embrace that. He's wanted to ingratiate himself with this city, with this culture, and everything else. I think that is impressive because you don't see that all the time. But on the floor, I've seen him get the strength. It's hard to say, it's hard to functionally apply strength, right? But you see him when he goes down the lane. He doesn't get knocked off his spot. He holds his position. You see him initiating contact. And the fact that he has to handle the ball as much as he does, he has one of the highest usage rates in the league. And sometimes you'll see the high turnover games and stuff like that. But he's still coming back to get the ball. He's not saying, hey, you take it. He's like, okay, whatever. I just turned it over 2 straight times. I'm still going to go run this. And guys follow him. That's the thing that's most impressive to me is if he's got a heater going, it's okay, give me the ball on the elbow, give me the ball on the block, give me the ball at the top of the key. You see him getting to his spots and negotiating that with the handle, with the finishing around the rim, I think is underrated because he has such an array of, I'm going to say trick shots, cool, but because he's not overly athletic, run and jump over the top of you, he has to do things jumping off the wrong foot or finishing with the left hand or playing around the angles and playing with some English and some spin. And I'm extremely impressed with there was the early game against Atlanta at home, not the game where Trae Young beat them late a couple weeks ago, but they played Atlanta at home, and there was the last sequence where he drove down the lane, do something a really awkward layup up, got it, and then right on the next play, I think it was Onyeka Okongwu, and he switched over, blocked his shot from behind when he had a sure layup or dunk, and Cade came over and did what he was supposed to do, basically got himself out of position to make a play. Those are things that you can't teach. Those are plays that help lift the franchise in the future. Those are plays that help, galvanize a locker room and help, whether they were a losing team at the time or not. But it's one of those things that's a catalyst for down the line that guys will look at and be like, you know what? That play let us know that, hey, we can make plays down the stretch of games. We can win games. And now when you enter into a playoff series, we're talking about a playoff series now. You know what I mean? We're actually talking about this franchise having significant hope in winning the playoff series. You're doing that and you're saying that because of what Cade Cunningham brings to the floor and what he does in those moments.
Yeah, I really like the fact that you brought up his strength and applying his strengths, because earlier in the year, or in his career, I should say, he wasn't as strong as he is now, and he did get knocked off his spots a bit on drives, and that was something he had to improve on. He's really gained a lot of strength, and like you said, applying that strength on drives. The other thing you mentioned that I think is a big deal with Cade is using the example like the Atlanta Hawks game, where he does have one of the higher usage rates in the league, and he does command a lot of responsibility on the offensive end. Basically, the entire offense builds around Cade. Every shot that they get is generated somehow, some way from a Cade advantage created. And usually, when you see those type of offensive systems with those kind of high usage guards, they don't have it on the other end. The James Hardens, the Luka Doncic, those heliocentric type high usage guards usually aren't giving it on the defensive end. And that's what really separates Cade. He has the size, versatility, and he also gives it on the defensive end. That play against the Hawks was tremendous. That was a two-way sequence. One play on a night he was struggling, by the way. against the Dyson Daniels, maybe the best perimeter defender, him and Ausar Thompson in the league, takes him to the basket, finishes with a lefty on a night he's struggling to hit the game-winning bucket. Then, like you said, comes back down and gets the game-saving block. The other night, obviously, he had the whole crowd losing their minds when he dove on that loose ball against the Clippers. So this is a dude that gives it on both ends, and I think that's what's going to separate him for the Pistons longer term. Let's talk all NBA. I talked with his trainer before the season. I talked with his trainer a lot. Me and Ashton talk often. And I remember before the year, he talked about, we're going after this all NBA. We're going after this all NBA. And I was like, this is before the Pistons went on this streak. I'm like, look, let's just, let's try to be a little realistic.
Right.
All-star team. I think he could get there. If they're in playoff contention, he can make the all-star team because Cade's good enough. But in order to be all NBA, your team has to be really good. You're not going to make all NBA from a bad team. Fast forward a few months, we're in February. Like we mentioned earlier, they're competing for potentially the 4th seed in the playoffs. Cade's averaging damn near a double-double with 25.5 points and around 9.5 assists. He's averaging the most assists a game since Isaiah Thomas in Pistons history. So he's doing all these things, and the Pistons are the darling of the NBA right now. They're being talked about everywhere right now because they're riding such a high. What do you think his ceiling is for all NBA this year?
I thought about that earlier because I tweeted saying it's going to be really hard to keep him off of an all NBA. And then I had to go back and think about it. Like, no, this is not like a third team sort of back end player. Like, I don't think he's a first teamer because I feel like first team is damn near set in stone with Jokic and Giannis and Shea and Tatum, and then one more guy, right? And theoretically that could be, but it's not positions anymore. So somebody could say, you know what, LeBron has been carrying the Lakers, and we give LeBron the LeBron Memorial spot. You know what I mean? We would like to reward the old guys on the back end, right? But I think a second team spot is not unrealistic. People are going to look at Jalen Brunson in New York and look at what that team is doing, even though the Pistons and Knicks are not terribly far away from each other, but record-wise, they're in a little different tier. You can look at, a guy like Anthony Edwards, even though the Timberwolves have not performed as a team, people still have last year in their heads in the run that he made. And then you have all the injuries to the likes of, the Jazz and the Lucas and all that. You know what I mean? But I think you can safely say, especially with Garland and Mitchell and those guys going to get their recognition, Evan Mobley too, that I think a second team nod is very respectful for what Cade is going to do. If you finish at 46, if you finish around 46 wins, right? I think they're 8 games or 7 games over 500 now, or 8?
7 games.
7 games over 500. So if you play, a little bit, 23 games left, you go 13-10 and you have 46 wins, like that puts you right in line. It's almost funny that the last quote unquote resurgent year that the Pistons had with a young player that they drafted was 96 with Grant Hill. And they finished with 46 wins that year. And that was Grant Hill's second year compared to Cade's fourth. But that was like, oh, Grant Hill is here. He's carrying the Pistons. They're going to go somewhere. And this is the guy that's going to do it. And I think Grant maybe Grant was second team that year. Probably should have been first because who cares about Scottie Pippen? You know what I mean? Like that sort of thing. But I think Cade is in a considerable spot to get second team, especially if he plays all the games. Like he's not a guy who's sitting. You know what I mean? Like availability means a lot. I'm a voter. So if I look down and I see that, hey, Cade has played 80 games, it's going to be real, real hard to keep him off the second team at the very least.
And I think it's crazy and wildly impressive that Cade's on pace to play around 80 games. You got to remember before this season, during the offseason when we'd host the podcast, and I'd be talking to the listeners, and I'd be getting comments and tweets from listeners saying, we got to see if Cade can be healthy. Can he play 60-plus games? He seems like he's always hurt. He missed his second season. He's always dinged up, blah, 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 all that. After missing an entire second season, he's played almost every single game this year, and he's been relatively healthy the entire season. And when you have, like you mentioned, these other guys who aren't reaching the 65-game limit, Cade's going to shatter that, and that provides the type of value he's providing game to game for an entire regular season. I think it's going to be infinitely more by the time the regular season ends. Once everyone looks back at it, it's going to be infinitely more than a lot of the other players. And look, like you mentioned, there's a lot of really good players in the NBA right now. I mean, Cleveland's having a tremendous season. They're probably going to get, I would guess Mitchell probably gets the first team selection, and then Mobley might get one as well. So, like, there's a lot of good teams and a lot of good players in this league right now. There's a lot of them that are going to be taken out, like you mentioned, with the Jazz and Lucas because of the 65 game limit. But one of the things you mentioned, I'm sorry, my phone keeps ringing.
No, you got it.
One of the things you mentioned that I think is important is that Cade is doing it on both ends of the floor, and a lot of these guys they don't do that. So, and you gotta get the last few years out of your mind, like you mentioned with the Ant Edwards. Like last year was so great, it was great, but I hope that voters don't keep, or maybe actually this might help Cade, to be honest, if they keep last year in mind, to be honest. Be like, oh, this team was 14 wins. Why are we even talking about this dude? Oh, because they won 40 more games or 30 more games the following year. Like maybe that actually might help Cade. Who knows? But I just hope the voters are aware that this team is being led by him, and he has them in an area that I don't think literally the most positive Piston fan could not have imagined them going on an 8-gamer and then BTA to the Boston Celtics at home for the 8th straight win, the defending NBA champs. Like, I just don't know how much better it could have gotten. So we'll see where he can get, but I think he's going to at least make the All-NBA third team. We'll see what happens, though. Coming up, JB Bickerstaff. I mean, this is such a magical year for the Pistons right now. We're talking about awards for almost every player on the team. Is Malik Beasley going to make 6th man of the year? Is Cade going to be all NBA? Now, is JB going to be coach of the year? Is Trajan Langdon going to make or become the executive of the year? We'll talk about that coming up as well. So I want to thank you guys again for making Locked On Pistons your first listen of every single day. We're free and available on all your podcast platforms. If you haven't already, head to the YouTube channel at Locked On Pistons. Hit that subscribe button or leave us a 5-star review, whatever podcast platform you're listening to this on. That's another great way to support the podcast. All right, so we've talked about Cade. We've talked about all the players. But another person that I think deserves a ton of credit for what's happened this year, obviously, is JB Bickerstaff. And Pistons fans feel very strongly about the head coach because of what happened last year with their last head coach. They feel very strongly about that as well. So the fact that JB has come in and really changed the culture, it feels like, and gotten these guys to buy in, fans are absolutely loving him and the job he's doing. And I think for the majority of this year, Kenny Atkinson obviously was leading the way in coach of the year, and deservedly so. Kenny has been great for Cleveland. They were at one level last year, and he's taken them to a whole nother level this year. So he's been fantastic. And I understand why he may be at the top of the odds as of right now. However, JB Bickerstaff is doing a crazy job with the Detroit Pistons when you think about where they were last year. Where do you think that JB has a real chance to win coach of the year? Do you think he should be the favorite? Where do you think he ends up here?
If you ask some of our Duke brethren on television, they say JJ Redick should be coach of the year. like everybody's got an opinion about this stuff. I think it all depends on the criteria. If you're looking at, man, who's the best coach, Norman Dale, Hoosiers, all that type of stuff. Yeah, whatever. Like, I view it as relative to expectations. That's why a lot of times you don't see coaches who take over good teams or have great seasons. Like last year was not Joe Mazzulla winning coach of the year. I don't think he won coach of the year, right?
I don't believe so.
At least I don't think he did. I'm a voter and I'll remember half the stuff.
I'll double check it.
You lose track half the time. No way. It's age. It's age. But no, I think when you looked at the modest expectations, the expectations was, man, if this team gets to a position where they're in a play-in conversation in the last month of the season, which is very modest when you're talking about maybe they have 28, 29, 30 wins, and they're like on the outskirts of it, but they're preparing for another lottery, then you're thinking JB did a good job because you had to strip away a lot of atrophy from this team last year. There was a lot of neglect, I think, that happened last year. You looked at the franchise and you looked at the coach, Monty Williams, and it didn't seem like he believed in the players. It didn't seem like he believed in the guys. He would say it all the time to make it almost like, hey, what do you expect me to do with these guys? Like, that was kind of the tone that he took. And when the coach behaves like that and the players hear it and they feel it and you go through all the losing, that takes a long time to build up confidence. So you have to strip away bad habits. You have to strip away all those things from the first day you walk into the gym. And JB Bickerstaff started that the first day he walked into the gym, not saying, hey, don't forget about not to say forget about last year, but just say, hey, yeah, you can remember last year. You don't want to lose like that again. And that's a galvanizing factor. And even when they got off to a slower start this year, they never let go of the rope. Like, he was still on them. Don't get me wrong, that man should have a endorsement deal with Halls, right? Because that man's voice sounds ashy as hell when the game is over. But he stays on him. He's calling every play. He's staying on the refs. You see it all the time. Like, he cares. And I think that's one thing that Piston fans desperately needed to see, somebody that was invested in winning and losing every day like they are. And sometimes you don't want your fan to bleed with the team, or, the coach to bleed with the team, because you need to have a little bit more of a 360-degree view. But JB has done a great job of empowering these guys. Don't forget, you got the right veteran players around them too, and identifying, okay, Jay Knife's going to need a little more love. Cade Cunningham's going to need the ball more. Isaiah Stewart, like, let's put him in the right position. You know what I'm saying? Putting him in the right position off the bench for him to be this catalyst. Like, a lot of that is coaching. And I think that part, more than taking over a winning team. Sometimes it's harder to take over a winning team because you've got the habits already, but you've got a lot of stuff that you got to strip away when you got a bad team.
Yeah, and I think what you mentioned, first of all, by the way, you were right. It was Mark Dagnall last year.
That's what, yeah.
So you were good. But like you mentioned, it's with expectations, I think, because if it was just best coach every year, like the best coach in the league, then like Greg Pop would have won it many times. Eric Spoelstra would win it a lot. Like, stuff like that would have been happening. But that's not what it's been, I feel like, ever, or at least during my time watching NBA. And again, the Pistons over-under was set at 24.5 this year by FanDuel. 24.5. They've shattered it before March even starts. Like, they're flying past expectations, especially if they finish as a top 5 seed in the East. Look, I get what Kenny Atkinson is doing in Cleveland, and I'm glad you mentioned that at the end. It is a really hard. It's harder, I feel like, to go from a really good team to becoming that great team. It's really hard to make that last step. So what he's doing with Cleveland, I'm nowhere near am I trying to take it away, because he's doing a great job. But this is a team that just won 14 wins last year, man. Like, they had the worst season in Pistons history, and in one offseason just completely flipped and are now talked about as like a top 5 Eastern Conference team. Like that, I think that really drives it home. And I would be shocked if the Pistons continue to play this way. Now, if they start to tail off a little bit, okay. But if they keep playing this way, I'd probably be shocked if he didn't end up winning the Coach of the Year, because of the situation he did take over and what he's turned it into in just one offseason. And it isn't just JB Bickerstaff. It's also Trajan Langdon, who I want to ask you about for Executive of the Year. I think that one's going to be a little bit harder. However, again, it kind of goes back to the expectations thing, where it's like, this is just one offseason from 14 wins, and he didn't go out and make a Boston Celtics trade for KG and Ray Allen move that is clearly going to work. He went out and had to make moves that maybe people weren't. I know Pistons fans, not all of them were extremely excited about paying Tobias $25 million. Like, not everyone was excited about doing that. Some people questioned it. He had to go out and get a value signing in a Malik Beasley to come in and now put up one of the best shooting seasons we've seen in a while. Like, he had to go out there and get the right veterans and get that right coach and put it on the court. Now, even Trajan himself said he didn't really expect him to be this good already, but accidents happen. It is what it is. Do you think Trajan has any chance of trying to get in that Executive of the Year conversation?
Well, funnily enough, the media doesn't vote on Executive of the Year. Like, executives do. So that's always a tricky thing, because so much of that is relationships. And so much of that is, once again, internal expectations. Like, what did the league think of the Detroit Pistons going into it relative to the roster? Did they look at that as like, man, this is a lot of, shall we say, like, good real estate? Like, this is a different job. Like, I'm going to take people back. This is a different job this summer compared to the summer of 2020 when Troy Weaver took it over. And this is not to reshape the reputation of Troy Weaver, but the house was burning. Like, let's be completely clear. This house was burning. You were trying to figure out stuff with Blake Griffin and Andre Drummond and Reggie Jackson, blah, 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 blah. Troy did the hard decisions of, man, we got to strip this thing down to the studs. We got to get back in the draft, blah, 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 blah. All that stuff done was to make this an attractive job for Trajan Langdon. You had the cap space. You had all these young guys. You had the number one stud in Cade Cunningham. So Trajan's thinking was, all right, it's year one. Let's see how these guys figure it out together. Let's evaluate them as opposed to let's trade Ausar Thompson. Let's trade Jaden Ivey. Let's trade Isaiah Stewart just so we can get our players in. No, let's see what these existing players can do with coaching, with culture, and figure out what we need to sprinkle around this. And I remember nobody was excited about Tobias Harris in the offseason. In the summer, not in the summer, like this time last year, we started hearing whispers. The Pistons are going to sign Tobias Harris in the offseason. It's usually how those things go. Like, okay, they need a veteran. Is that the right veteran? You know what I mean? Is that the veteran that's at the right stage of his career where he can still play, but he can still usher these young guys along? Like they identified whoever did it, right? Because it was before Trajan got here, we was hearing it. Whoever did it, kudos to you. Now, Malik Beasley, Tim Hardaway, like those are good value signings in trades. Tim came over a trade with the Quentin Grimes thing, and maybe you can quibble and say, should you have kept Quentin Grimes? Whatever. But I think so much has gone right this year, and sometimes it's best that you sit still. And it's hard to prove from a voting standpoint. You know what he didn't do? He didn't tear it down. He sat still. And maybe you can say that was one of Troy Weaver's small mistakes in the very beginning was when, okay, Bruce Brown, you got to go. This player, you got to go, as opposed to, hey, let's see if maybe we can find some value, you know what I'm saying, here or there. But if nothing else, you still got clean books to move forward. You've got to figure out what you're going to do with Duren and Ivy headed into their, extension years. But you've got great fertile ground. Those are great problems to have, as opposed to, man, we don't have players worth a damn. Like you come in and you're ready. And the fact that they gave Cade his extension without much haggling, that settled things down, because you don't want your number one guy feeling like the new people coming in don't believe in him.
Yeah, I completely agree with all that. I didn't know that the media didn't vote on executive of the year. That's a good tidbit. I just learned about that. So that is interesting. I think it's going to be hard for him to win it because we'll see. But it more so just speaks to the job he did do, that that I'm bringing it up, is that he's done such a great job for the team already just within one season. Now, as you mentioned with Troy Weaver, there's always another step that you have to make. Let's see how he does once he has to now, okay, I realize I have a good team. Now what's the next step? Because like you mentioned at the very beginning, everyone kind of believed in Troy in 2020 because he realized, okay, we got to strip it down and we have to build this thing through the draft. It's going to be tough for a minute, but we have to do it, organically. So He did that part right. It was, okay, what's the next step? And the step after that, and the step after that, eventually got him, let go. Let's see how Trajan does now once, like you mentioned at the beginning of this podcast, once you have expectations. Because
it's important to note that Troy's flaws, and I'm sure you probably outlined them, you know what I'm saying, a lot, but a lot of that stuff was organizationally that I won't say had nothing to do with him, but so much of being a president of basketball operations is making sure that everybody in the building is on the same page. And there was a lot of indecision. There were a lot of finger pointing last year going through that 26-game losing streak, and nobody wanted to seem to step up and take accountability. One thing I will give him, Monty Williams was not his guy. That was not, they had a relationship, but that wasn't the guy he wanted to hire. That was Tom Gores. Now, maybe, Kevin Ollie or whatever might not have been the best choice at that point, but it's important to remember when we go in is to not demonize everybody just because, oh, he's gone now, let's demonize him. No, let's hold him accountable for the mistakes that he made, while also saying, you know what? Jaden Ivey, Jalen Duren, Ausar Thompson, those aren't always easy picks to make. And sometimes we think the draft is an easy thing. It's really not. But building a team is much more than making picks. It's a big part of it, but it's not the only thing. And he got this team off to a good start by making the right picks.
Yeah, and the next episode I was going to spend talking about this Troy Weaver thing because a lot of fans, I think it's been spearheaded by or gasoline was poured on it because of what Stephen A said today on First Take about Troy Weaver. But there's been a lot of talk of, does Troy deserve any credit? Does, all that kind of stuff. Real quickly, I just want to say the two picks that I give Troy the most credit for was the Ausar Thompson pick, because that was not like a gimme pick. That wasn't everyone believed Ausar was the pick. I remember doing the Locked On mock draft, and I picked Ausar, and I remember getting laughed at for picking Ausar. Like, everyone was not in agreement that Ausar was the pick, and he went out and picked him, and it looks like it was the right pick. So that's a good one. And then trading up to get JD, depending where you stand on JD. If you believe in JD and really like how he's done, that was a mid first round pick he went up and got, and that's a really good one. Bringing up the Cade one, saying he had the first, I get that. But I thought those two were and then even Stu, because Stu was the mid-round draft too. That wasn't at the top of the draft. Oh, this guy clearly was given to me, like it's easy pick here. Those ones were ones he had to go out and hunt out.
Yeah, we're going to kill him for Killian Hayes.
Yeah.
Right? Right? If we're going to kill you for Killian Hayes, I'm going to give you some credit on the back end. And I'll say this. I was one of those people that saw Evan Mobley and said, that's Tim Duncan. You know what I mean? So I understood why they took Cade, number one, because you needed a franchise player. I thought Evan Mobley was the best player. I thought Cade Cunningham was the franchise player, if that makes sense. So I understood it either way. And Troy Weaver was a huge fan of Evan Mobley. He's going to be Defensive Player of the Year. You know what I mean? But once he got Cade here, he wrapped his arms around him. He didn't put the right players around him. You got 5 centers on the roster and everything else. But he did wrap his arms around that player. And it's not always easy. Everybody says, unless it's LeBron James, you know what I mean? Unless it's Magic Johnson at the number 1 pick or whatever it is. These things ain't as easy cut and dry as we like to make them out to be. There's a lot of discussion that has to happen. And sometimes you wind up making the right pick and getting the number 1 pick in the right year. And for once in the Pistons franchise history, they got the number 1 pick and they got it right.
I mean, and that draft class, I mean, you mentioned Evan Mobley. That's another dude who's going to probably make an All-NBA team. Like, the top of that draft class in general is just really good. It's really stacked.
It's going to be a historical draft when we look at it in 3 or 4 years.
When you look back at it, it's crazy. It's really good. And you could have went, and look, this is coming from a big Cade guy. I believe in Cade's ceiling to the absolute utmost. But Evan Mobley is right there too. So, I mean, looking back at it being objective, you really could have went. I mean, seeing how they've planned out now, I mean, these guys are probably like right next to each other in the exact same rankings. They're going to be right next to each other, I think, for the rest of their career. So we can wrap it up there with that. Trajan doing a good job. JB doing a hell of a job. And also Cade, Stu, Ausar, JD, all these guys, they're spearheading this. The young guys are leading the way. And we'll wrap it up with this right here. Vinny mentioned earlier, I thought it was a fantastic point, probably the best point that should be taken from this podcast, I feel, is that it's different watching this team get to where it goes when you have like homegrown talent. If you get a different type of connection to the players, the fans feel different type of connection when you see them start as little kids and, obviously like 18, but like kids in the league that are, need to put on strength and need to learn how to do this and didn't know how to do this and all this stuff. And you watch them go through each phase of their career as they get to this point. That's not to say they didn't have a connection to the going to work team, obviously, but it's just different when it's all homebred guys. It's different. So everyone have fun with this year. No expectations. That's when it's the most fun. And hopefully this team eliminates the playoff drought. That's what I hope.
Oh, that's gonna happen. You don't got to worry about that.
Yeah, that would be great to happen. Last question, actually, just real quickly. We gotta get out of here. What do you think? Who do you think is the best matchup for the Pistons if they want to win?
I think the best matchup, shockingly, would be the New York Knicks. Sorry, James.
I
think Indiana would kind of be the worst matchup because it just feels like Indiana. I just feel like Indiana would be a bad matchup for them because of Pascal Siakam and because Tyrese Halliburton looks like he's got it. But I think New York, you are deeper than them. You can exploit them at every vulnerable point for the Knicks. I'm looking forward to a Game 3 in Detroit. Loud Game 3 in Detroit, Michigan in April. That's going to be a rocking atmosphere. And, the fact that we're able to say that's some crazy shit, man.
Yeah, it's crazy. We're going to have to get James on and ask him how he feels about, having to come back for a playoff series, if he's going to be feeling good about that. But, Vinny, thank you for coming on the podcast, man. You guys can follow him over on Twitter at Vince Goodwill. You can find his work at Yahoo Sports and follow his podcast, A Good Word. Appreciate you making time and coming on, man. I know how busy you are, so really appreciate it. I hope you guys enjoyed the episode. Hit that subscribe button to the YouTube channel. Leave us a 5-star review, whatever podcast platform you're listening to us on. Thank you for making it the first listen of every single day. And until next time, I'll see you guys later. Stay safe out there. And until next time, peace out.